Hey everybody. How's everyone doing? Let me know in the chat how you're doing and what questions you have. We're going to be talking about a few different topics tonight. We're going to be talking about the AP reading and some insights from that. We're also going to be talking about school reports and like what info you do and don't get, how to interpret it in case anyone's like a first-time AP Lang teacher. And we can also, if people want to, talk about like how to start to think about instruction for next year. I know a lot of us are just fresh out of school and we probably don't want to think about next year just yet. Maybe we do, I don't know. So let me know what questions you have. Hopefully, y'all are having much better weather than we are. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's storming outside, and we had a tornado warning earlier. It wasn't actually for our area though, but my app still went off. So it's in like the next county over. We're having some severe thunderstorms. So don't be alarmed if you hear thunder in the background. All right, I'm just going to reload the chat because it looks like it froze on my end. Hopefully it lets me do that. Yes, I'll be safe. Don't worry. I checked the radar and it looks like it had already passed us, but there was a lot of wind and stuff. Like our lawn stuff is like everywhere, even though I tried to secure it. It's not. So like my son's tricycle is like halfway across the yard. It's fine. All right. So thank you all for joining me. Your last day was okay. Wow. So you must be, are you from New England, Chris? Or like I feel like New England has like the latest dates, so like 6/23. So we got out at the end of May. But we also start it's a week later this year, but usually it's mid-August. So that's Washington. Okay. Because I know some of the people at the reading who were like from mostly from like Massachusetts and New Jersey, like they were still in session. Like we had AP readers that were having to try to basically like go back to their hotel room at night and like enter their students' grades for the year. Oh, you started in September. That makes sense. I know some places start after Labor Day, which is kind of nice. Okay, so let's start by talking about like the AP scores in general. I know most of you may have already seen this information, but did people see Trevor Packer's tweets about like the composite scores and like the percentages of things? If you don't know who Trevor Packer is he the CEO of College Board? I don't know. He's higher up though. And I don't pay attention to Twitter except once a year when he's starting to tweet about the score percentage breakdowns. Sarah did. Hey, Sarah. Okay. So let me see. I have screenshots of them. I don't know if it'll let me show those or not. But basically, yeah, I don't think it's going to let me show it. Maybe it will. Basically what he does is he does a breakdown for each like AP test. And usually they're sort of in the order that they were. So usually we get the AP Lit scores first. And so for the past 2 years, AP Lit scores have been higher than AP Lang. And this used to not always be the case. Usually AP Lang scores were higher. And then to the best of my knowledge, they did something. They kind of like reconfigured AP Lit because it wasn't, or like how they scored it because it wasn't totally matching up, I guess, with like college standards or something. And so because of that, now we've seen an increase in scores. And that has kind of brought up the question of like, should we do that for AP Lang? And from what I've seen, the College Board has said, that the results are indicating students are well prepared for college. And so there's a lot going on there that I don't really know about, but I do know that some teachers were disappointed with like the averages that we saw for this year. So let me see if it'll let me show you all this. Begging for recalibration. That's kind of where I'm leaning as well, because I just feel like our numbers could be a little bit higher, or maybe should be a little bit higher. But well, let me do that. Yes. Okay, I'm going to try to show y'all. I'm actually making a video about this, and hopefully it'll let me present full screen. Hopefully it'll let me make it bigger. Okay. So I don't know how helpful this is. This is one of Trevor Packer's tweets. I had the other screenshots and then I accidentally deleted them off my phone. So I just kind of copied and pasted the info here. So hopefully you can see this, but basically 5% or sorry, 10% of students earned a composite of a 5, which is kind of in range for what it was last year. For a composite score of a 4, we have 20% and 3 is 26%. So basically 56% of students had a 3 or above, which we consider a qualifying score. When it comes to AP Lang, we try not to use the word pass. Now, I know I've slipped up in front of my students. I've probably slipped up in a YouTube video. I've probably slipped up on TikTok. But we try to use the phrase qualifying score. The other thing that we have to remember is that even these students here, like the 29% of students who earned a 2, that does not mean that they're not going to do well in college. It doesn't mean that they did poorly in the course. It's just the results for that day. And then 15% of students earned a 1. And so basically how that works is they take the multiple choice. Each one is worth 1 point. And then there's the 3 essays and they have a multiplier. So the one that I use in my classroom is 3.0566. So I take how many points they earned on their essays and multiply it by that. And that gives me the rest of the info I need. And so there's 100 possible points. And so for students to be on track for a composite of a 3, we're usually looking for approximately 52 points. Just so you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. So the results over here were kind of what I expected. The thesis point, I know a lot of us have said that it is very easy to earn. 96% of students earned the thesis. The 4% that didn't, I'm assuming one of 2 things happened. Either number 1, they didn't attempt it, or number 2, they just didn't have a defensible stance. Some students don't write the essays at all, or they write like a single paragraph. So there are times when an essay is given a score of a no response or a 0, just kind of depending on how the student did or did not attempt it. I'm encouraged to see the number of students getting 3s and 4s in row B, which is evidence and commentary. I think that's good. A decent number are getting a 2. So hopefully we can kind of next year have more people moving from this 2 up into this 3. And then 9% earn the sophistication point, and that's actually good. So many students want to learn how to earn the sophistication point, but it is actually very rare. So any number between 5 and 9% is pretty standard. Usually synthesis is the higher end. So it's usually, from what the data I've seen, it's closer to 9%. So synthesis looked decent. And this is like global data. So this is including the operational exam, which was the paper test, the digital test, and then international makeup, all that. So this is kind of like global averages here. For rhetorical analysis, these numbers are okay. I really would love to see a higher percentage for the thesis point for rhetorical analysis. If they didn't get the thesis point, it's probably because if they attempted it, they maybe didn't have clear rhetorical choices. So this one's usually the lowest for the thesis point percentage. But it looks like the scores for row B for a 4 and a 3, sorry, the font is kind of not the greatest, were pretty decent. And then 6% earn the sophistication point, which is pretty standard for rhetorical analysis. And then we have argument. We talked about this last month. My students did not like their argument prompt, and I actually read that one in Tampa. I can see why my students did not like it. We can talk about that in a little bit. 95% earned at this point. Because it's the third question, I think I could be wrong, but it seems like maybe more students don't attempt the argument one as much. It's one that they tend to leave blank, or like if they're going to leave one blank, it might be that one. Scores were not so, like, I think this could be a little bit higher. All right. Like I know it's pretty much the same as rhetorical analysis, but I feel like, hopefully as the programs grow, where we can see a little bit more of students getting a 4 in row B. 32% and a 3 I don't think is bad. And again, I think here that these 2s, I'm hoping that next year we can see fewer 2s and more 3s. And then 5% earn their sophistication point. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that and just see if anyone's saying anything in the chat. I was trying to remember the difference between the 2022 and 2023 scores. I'm trying to remember last year's global average, because in my mind, I thought it was like 64%. But then I think based on how people were reacting on Facebook, I think that was either the wrong number or I'm thinking of the wrong year. So does anyone remember what last year's scores were? I thought the sophistication was lower for all 3 essays. Yeah, it seemed like, I don't know. I personally did not feel like I gave a lot of sophistication points this year. But in general, I think now that we have a better understanding of sophistication, I'm expecting that maybe we'll see an increase as like the years go on, because I feel like the first couple years people didn't really know like what it was or how to earn it. I know a lot of us are relying on like these college board samples. And sometimes when you only get one sample that has a sophistication point, it's really hard to like base your instruction on that. So there's kind of talk of like, okay, the more that we see these release samples that get it, maybe the more teachers can help their students get it. But it's not supposed to be a point that a lot of people get. Like it's supposed to be relatively rare. On the flip side of things, the thesis point is like very low hanging fruit, if you will. So that's the info for the breakdown. And like I said, it's global info. So don't stress out too much, because just because like if we find the global average low, it doesn't necessarily mean that your student scores are not going to be good. And speaking of that, oh, thank you, Laura. Let's see. You got this stuff from, I think this is from last year. Let me see. Oh, 2021 and 22 side by side. Awesome. Let's see what it was. Okay, so in 2021, it was 9.1% got here. Let me share this. I'm sure people could click on it, but let me share my screen so y'all can see. Thank you, Laura. That was really helpful. Okay, so 9% essentially got a 5. Okay, so last year we were kind of right at that same spot as we are now. There weren't any like decimal points this year. Okay, so 2021 was better. Okay, so we're kind of moving down a little bit in the number of students who got a 4. Okay, but then we kind of went up this year with the number of students that got a 3. Okay. It is interesting, for sure. So the scores are kind of in line with what they were last year. Let's see if I can do some quick math off the top of my head. Probably not. Okay, so 55%. So okay, so it's literally like if I'm right, we're like pretty much exactly what we were last year, maybe 1% higher. I don't know. Personally, I would love to see us be in like the 60 to 70% pass rate range or qualifying score rate range. Maybe that's like super optimistic. I don't know. Okay, so let's chat really quickly about the info that you get on your score report. Is anybody in here a first year AP Lang teacher? Like you've never seen an instructional report before? Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah sent me a picture of it too. That's awesome. Hey, y'all, if you haven't seen it yet, I did a video. I posted it earlier today. It's a multiple choice discussion video, and I met Sarah in Tampa, and she's actually in the video. I had like 5 other teachers on a Zoom, and we answered questions. So it was super fun to record. Okay, so we got at least 3 people who are a first year. Okay, perfect. So this is going to be the first time that I think that you'll see instructional data. You might have gotten it from your previous teacher. I don't know. That might depend on the school. But the instructional report can be helpful. Admittedly, there's more info I wish we got, but the info that we do have is helpful. So I'm the only AP Lang teacher in my school/district because of how we configure things. So all the data I see is my own students. If you are in a bigger school where there's multiple teachers, you might kind of see like your sections, and they might be kind of broken up a little bit differently. But basically, from what I remember, at the top, it was like your scores, like your students. And then it was like the state average, the national average, and the global average. And we already kind of know the global average because that was the data that we just looked at. I really like to see how my students fare in comparison to the state. Spoiler alert, Arkansas scores are usually not good. But I think if I lived in a different state, That would be one thing that I would kind of look at is like, where do my students fit in terms of our state? But please keep in mind too that there's different like demographics. Like I teach in a pretty rural area. My husband teaches in a very urban area, and we have very different students. He does not teach AP Lang, but we have very different students. And so because of that, like our scores could look very different. So in that regard, maybe comparing at the state level may or may not be helpful. And then the national level, just kind of seeing where your students fit compared to like the rest of the nation. I think it's important to remember that these scores, even though we worked on them all year, it's just one day. You're going to have students that perhaps score higher than what you thought, and some that score lower than what you thought. Each year, our AP coordinator makes us do like a predicted composite, and I always give her a like the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, because I have some students that I like on a really good day they're a 5, but on a bad day they're a 3. And like other students, a good day for them is a 3, a bad day is a 2. So that way she can kind of see where we're at. If you haven't thought of that, you could, if you have access to your roster, you can kind of make one. It might kind of help you kind of predict like your, or like see if your scores are in line with what you anticipated. Scores come out starting July 5th. I forgot what year it was. It might have been 2019. One year I tried to log on and I could not. It took a while because everybody was trying to log on. So if you're having trouble logging on that morning, maybe wait a little bit, because from what I remember, it was supposed to be a release by like time zone and like by state. But that year, my students weren't supposed to know their scores like the same day I was, or so I thought. And then they did anyway. So just kind of know that there's a lot of people trying to access these scores, not just AP Lang students. Something else on these instructional reports that can be helpful is you get a breakdown from like for multiple choice and FRQs. And so what it'll tell you is kind of like the skills that were assessed and how your students did. And then off to the side, there's usually a part that says like, maybe like exceeds state or exceeds global. So you can identify your students' strengths for that cohort quite easily. One of the things that I thought was helpful last year is it gave us like the averages for each of the essays. So I know last year my students, like collectively, their best essay was synthesis and rhetorical analysis was second, argument was third. And we had really been focusing on rhetorical analysis. So I was able to kind of see with the info that they gave us what kind of worked in comparison to the previous year. And then argument, I don't know comparing this year to last year how it's going to go because my students this year did not like the prompt. So I'm kind of like, I'm expecting argument to be our lowest again. I could be wrong. It could surprise me. But just keep in mind that like one of them is probably going to be the lowest. I did have a year where I had two of them have the exact same average, but and your averages can be close together, but it does kind of tell you, okay, this group, their strongest essay was this, their weakest essay was that. And you can use that to plan instruction, especially if you're a first year teacher. Like I know when I was a first year teacher, I tried to focus on each of the essays equally. And then now I focus more on rhetorical analysis and less on argument because we kind of in our department are focusing on argument a little bit earlier. So the idea is that those students won't need those skills from me. I can just refresh them and things like that. So it can really help to kind of see on a skill level how your students are. And then also it'll tell you like what percentage of your students earned the thesis point, what percentage of your students earned like for the sophistication point. It'll tell you for each of the essays in row B, it'll tell you. And then I think I didn't try this out last year, but I saw something online today that I was looking at where it said you can like click on stuff and it'll kind of tell you like your students who earned a 2 kind of collectively did these things. So it doesn't give you individual data for each student. And your students might ask, no matter how many times I tell my students, you only get your composite score, I still have people contacting me asking like, hey, can I figure out how many multiple choice I got right? Unfortunately, no. They don't tell students that, and they don't really tell us that. And that can be really frustrating for students, especially if they don't get the score that they want. They want to know why. Another question that students will sometimes ask is like, can I get it rescored, or can I complain, or can I whatever? And technically, I suppose they could reach out to the college board, but they don't have a practice of like rescoring exams. So just something to keep in mind with that. But you will get to see how your students are doing. And last year, because of the number of students I had, I was kind of able, I wasn't able to predict who got what scores, but as far as like who got the sophistication point or something like that. But it did kind of tell me, looking at the data, like if a student earned a 2, I could kind of figure out who that was and kind of why. Like based on the data, I could kind of figure out, okay, they were primarily making like a 2 out of 4 in row B. And so like that helped shape my focus this year because I was really trying to make sure that any students who are making a 2 out of 4 in row B, that we were really trying to one essay at a time get them up to that 3 out of 4, if that makes sense. For those of you with multiple sections or huge classes, I imagine that the data might get a little bit harder to interpret, but I do like the breakdown of skills. Any questions about anything I've said so far? I can't show you an instructional report because it has like our school's data on it. So unfortunately, I can't like show you one to show you what it looks like. But if you have a question about something about like scores and what info you get, please feel free to drop it in the chat. Or if you have any advice, if you are a veteran teacher and you're like, hey, you forgot to mention this, or here's how I use my instructional report, let us know that as well. I'll give people a second in case anyone's typing. If not, we can talk about like how to plan for next year or questions that people have as well. Okay, so one of the things that happens each year, and I say this in a video that I'm working on, and I'm gonna put a post probably in most of the Facebook groups, um, is there's kind of a danger of comparison. And I think I kind of touched upon this a little bit, but I really want to make sure that new teachers know this. There, if you are a member of those Facebook groups, and I have a Facebook group, so Tim Freitas and I have a Facebook group that we're working on growing. It's called the English Coaching Garden. I can put a link in the chat if I need to, but there's other really big Facebook groups. One of the things that always happens is people post their celebration posts, which is wonderful, but they also post, like, we see a lot of like, I failed my students and stuff like that. Please don't compare your students to other people's students. Even year to year, I've learned not to do this, at least to an extent. Um, because as much as it's like, oh, well, I'm the same teacher or I try to be better, it's not the same group of kids. So please don't get upset if you see other people posting like 100% pass rate and you have a lower rate. First of all, they could have had like 4 kids. I my teacher bestie who now teaches AP Lit, like when she came to our school, she was talking about her 100% pass rate. Come to find out, she had 4 students. So, and she's like, she and I joke about this now, but I was like, man, now she readily admits she had 4, and that is great that all of them did well. But it can, if you only know a portion of the data, then it can make you feel really bad, like, oh, I didn't have anywhere near 100%. Well, yeah, but you might have had 80 kids. So just something to think about, that people kind of have different circumstances. Even like the teacher who teaches in the town that I live in, she and I have very different situations. Like her class is like a concurrent, no, is it dual enrollment? I think it's dual enrollment. So her class, like they take the exam, but they also kind of automatically get college credit because it's considered a college class. At our school, it's separate. So college English is a separate class. It's not the same as AP Lang. Because of that, a lot of her students take the class because they want the dual enrollment credit, not because they care about AP Lang. So that influences her numbers. Whereas my students, they take AP Lang because they don't want to try to take college English. They want the credit. So even though we literally have like students who live 30 minutes apart and our demographics are really the same, our school's circumstances aren't. So I say that to like kind of let you know to give yourself grace. You are more than just a number, and your kids took these tests, so you did not fail anyone. But also try not to play that comparison game. Tyler says I don't put much emphasis on it. I think it's a good resource for information on which pieces I did well or poorly, but I don't do that much with it because it feels like I'm overthinking it. I agree. We had this like form that we were supposed to fill out a couple years ago, but like from our district about like what were your strengths and what were your weaknesses and what are you going to do differently. But the data, it didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. So don't be surprised if you look at the data and you're like, yeah, kind of already expected this because you've seen the prompts and you know your students. That being said, I think like some of the data can be helpful, but I definitely kind of glance over it and then I don't really look at it again, if I'm being honest. I just kind of like internalize what I need to and then it gets put to rest. But yeah, it's good to know that other people don't put much emphasis on it either. It's just it's there. I think if you're a first year teacher for AP Lang, I think the info might be more helpful. Um Also, the other thing is like I don't know if you I guess your school would have to give you the previous teacher's report. I don't know that I would necessarily want to see. I mean, I'm okay. When I took over AP Lang, I wanted to know if my students had improved upon the previous teacher's scores. So I get that if that's you. But like now that I've taught it for a while, I don't know that that's like the healthiest thing to think. But because I wanted to know, like, did we do better? But like I feel like there's a point where you're comparing, trying to compare to yourself. I think it's good to remind you what essay is your strength and what essay is your weakness. I agree. Especially because for me, every year it's argument. And so every year I'm trying something different for argument. And it's not that their average is bad. It's just it's the lowest. Actually, one year it was rhetorical analysis by a tenth of a point. Um, but like usually argument is the lowest. And synthesis for my kids is always high. And they say, I think like for them, a lot of them take a push and they're used to DBQs. And I know they're different essays, but there's something about synthesis where they're like, yeah, that one's solid. It's easy. And it's the one that most of them do first. So I feel like they put their best effort in that one. I think we see that with like the global scores is that synthesis tends to be a little bit higher. And it might be because it's first, and it might be because essentially all the info is there. So okay, so that's the instructional report. But yeah, just like a quick reminder not to compare too much. I'm gonna be really honest, like when scores come out, I kind of like stay off of those Facebook groups for a day or two. I try to like pop in here and there to like offer encouragement and stuff, but it can be really overwhelming. Trying to like figure out like everybody else's scores. There, it feels like there's a lot of noise. That's not to say that you shouldn't post your successes or your questions or anything like that. It's just that if you are a brand new teacher and you're seeing all this like info thrown at you, it can be really easy to like play the comparison game. Chris said it's overwhelming. I agree. Kim said I scored synthesis this year and trust me, students wrote a ton. So Kim, I'm really curious, what did you see as strengths with synthesis? And I can talk about some stuff for Q3. And then Sarah, if you're still on, I know you did Q2 and you worked on a couple different prompts. So if you have any insight about rhetorical analysis and like what trends you noticed, that would be awesome. And if anyone else on here is a reader that I didn't say, please feel free to put your insights in the chat. Just like general trends. I would love to know what people observed. I'll give y'all a second to type. I can tell you all a little bit about argument too. Oh, Sheena, we connected outside the hotel and then I never got a chance to take a picture with you and it made me sad. Next year we need to take the picture. I actually went up to the hotel room and I was like, I should have just taken the picture then. So you scored RA, Rita Dove. Yeah, I like the Rita Dove speech, but I was looking at it. I feel like because I always tell my students to analyze chronologically, I'm hoping that they kind of went with her like, I wish this, I wish this, I wish this. Cause as I was kind of scrolling through booklets to get to Q3, I saw a lot of like repetition that kids were writing about. So basically, if you're not an AP reader, what happens is like the whatever essay you're supposed to be scoring, you know how the kids have to kind of bubble it in at the top? It used to be a box, now it's a bubble. It brings that up. So you just look at that essay, but sometimes it's wrong. So you have to like look through the whole book. Or if you're worried that it's blank, you have to look through the whole book. And so I looked at a few Rita Dove essays, and I saw a lot of like repetition, illusion, which I think they might have been like misidentifying, maybe, or like calling it, I don't know. But I'm curious how the RA went. Okay, so let's see. Kim says students struggled with connecting to the big picture to get the sophistication point. Yeah, that's the thing. I realized that I tell my students all the time, situate the issue in a broader context. And I try to tell them what that means, but I always kind of wonder, like, do they get it? Chris said it seemed to me like a hard one to chunk into sections. That's what I thought, is because like even though it was kind of already in sections, I was worried that the sections themselves were too similar. So that way, like, I don't know. I was worried that we were going to see a lot more device driven essays this time. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. Sarah said I can share what I took away from the Michelle Obama one. Yeah, so for those who don't know, there were two tests. There was like the digital, which was one set, and then the operational or like the paper test, which is the other. And honestly, both prompts seemed comparable. I do think the students who took the digital test had a better Q3 than the paper test. And my roommate in Tampa, who's actually a fellow Arkansas teacher, she had the other Q3, and she said that it was the community voices one. She said that that one was much more approachable. So let's see. Thesis relate back to the purpose. Yeah. So we always tell our students, connect to the message, argument, or purpose for RA. And a lot of them sometimes tend to like not include that. And then a lot of like ethos, alliteration, repetition. So like to do what? Okay, so they're identifying the choices, and this is where there's a lot of chat about the thesis point. There are those, and I understand this, there are those that feel that we should require more than just name dropping devices to get the point. I always tell my students to do the what and the why. And I try to get them to use strong verbs, but you never know. They used illusion to connect the wishes to Cinderella. Huh. Did that work for them? I love the ones that were marked on tone shifts for Michelle Obama. I was thinking that the Obama one was more accessible also. Yeah, I'm wondering if the digital test. Okay, so here's what they told us. I was at the open forum, so I can say this. This is switching gears a little bit, but they said that multiple choice for the digital exam was higher and they had to like norm it or whatever. It's not curving it. I feel like they're going to be pushing the digital test. So what better way? Okay, this is me being like, what better way? If I wanted people to take a digital test, I would tell them how amazing the digital test is and how few problems there were. So that way they would take the digital test. My students are still going to take paper. I think it's like our whole school is. And I don't know, did anyone have students take the digital? Like was it easier? They told us that students really liked the ability to like highlight on multiple choice. And so I don't know, like it really got me thinking like which format is better. But I liked some of the prompts on the digital version better. Let's see. Students who scored really well showed the sources talking to each other for synthesis. Yes. Because a lot of times some of the lower essays that I feel like we see in class, and I imagine it's the same way on the exam, they kind of like isolate the sources. I've never actually, okay, last year we all had to score each of the 3 essays, but I've only ever been assigned rhetorical analysis or argument as a reader. I haven't had to do synthesis yet. I say that and I'll probably get it next year. Too much Obama used diction and logos, ethos, pathos. Let's see. So Sheena said regarding rhetorical analysis thesis, 2 things. Using the template is definitely the right move. Yes. Um, when the kids underline their thesis statements, it's a godsend. They did that for argument too, and it actually kind of really did help, especially though there were a few times where what they underlined, because this was what something our table was talking about, what they underlined was actually not their thesis. Like what they, it might have been what they intended for it to be, but there was another sentence that was actually asserting a position. So as long as it's there, it doesn't have to be underlined. But I do agree with you. It kind of draws your eyes to it. Especially sometimes with like the various handwriting styles and stuff. But yeah, those templates, like sentence frames and stuff, are very helpful because it makes sure that students are putting the right info in. After looking at some of the handwriting, I 100% agree with digital. Yeah, it got really hard to read some of the handwriting at times. I apparently, just personally, I apparently do not like reading cursive because there would be a time when I'd see a cursive essay and I'm like, oh. um, the person next to me had an essay where it was handwritten and it was English, but the letters were so like slanted and they were like lines, that it took her a while and tried to ultimately send it to the table reader. And so I feel like the people who scored the digital exam, maybe were able to read a little bit more quickly. Maybe, I don't know, because it was typed. The other thing is, someone had said that they kind of assumed that the digital paragraphs might have been longer because students can type more quickly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were better paragraphs. So I'm curious, for those that looked at the digital exam, like, did you feel like the paragraphs were longer typed than what the kids who handwrote the essays did? Or was it just like sizing and it like maybe just looked bigger? Tyler, okay, said mine took the digital and I like the format when I looked at it. My concerns were mostly alleviated. Okay, that's good to know. That said, on test day, I had 3 students not have access and have to take the late one. Yeah, they gave us the breakdown of like how many students um ultimately like had technical difficulties and had to do the makeup, because like they also said there were some that had like, okay, like the testing difficulty of like a fire alarm or something like, so like it was a very small percentage who actually had technical difficulties because of like the website or like the app. um but I feel like the more they do it, that will alleviate those concerns. Because that was one of my concerns, was um, the ability to get on the app. We, for the past several years, have taken the ACT online, and granted, there's a lot more kids at our school taking the ACT than the AP Lang test, but there's always like little tech snafus that day. So like our students are just they don't want the digital for that reason, though they wish they could do like a hybrid. They told me they wish they could do they could type their essays but have like the paper copy for multiple choice. And I was like, guys, that's not an option. Let's see. Tim's template for RA. I even have a thesis dance that I use for students to remind them. That is pretty cool. I think separating the purpose to understand big ideas and audience helps them for better commentary. I agree, because a lot of times what we see is students kind of name dropping stuff at the beginning. I know that Tim in his thesis uses the word ultimately. I saw that a lot in the argument essays, not necessarily in the thesis, but kind of like as a transition word. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but I saw the word ultimately as a transition word a lot. I'm not saying I didn't like it. I just didn't realize it was going to be used so frequently. Yes. We are one-to-one as well. I rarely have my students handwrite. I did an APSI last week and we were able to look at sample essays from both. Typed essays were definitely longer across the board. See, that's good to know. I'm just wondering if like, because sometimes when kids write longer essays, they ramble. So like longer doesn't always mean better. Um, I had an 8-page argument essay that I read once, and it did not, despite it being 8 pages, it did not score super well. But I kind of wonder, like, there's this idea of like they can type more quickly, but like, are they still having a strong line of reasoning? Whereas there's some that say when students are having to handwrite, they're having to like slow down and then they're thinking it through more. So even though they might not be writing as much, they have a better line of reasoning. So I'm really curious. I feel like it might depend on the student, but I'm curious if there's a correlation between like writing more and their scores or if it didn't really work. I was gonna say we need to know more about this dance. Nextly as a transition word. Oh my goodness. That's a new one. So Q3, here's what I can tell you. So many essays did not have actual commentary. So as I'm sure you can imagine, and as we sort of predicted when we looked at these prompts, so the paper test, which is what most students took, the prompt had to do with like persuasion, but it was kind of like I feel like there's a disconnect between like the quote and the task, like because some students like they really needed to be talking about using fear to persuade. But the quote also mentioned collaboration, and you could talk about that. And then some students literally turned it into like the value of persuasion, like it's good to persuade people, which is not what the quote was necessarily saying. So there were I felt like there were more ways to kind of misinterpret this one, but most students were fine with it. But there were a lot of essays about World War II, COVID, civil rights, and it was clear that some students were really trying to give us the good specific evidence and like factual evidence, but it also seemed like a lot of the paragraphs for the lower scoring essays, in my opinion, it was just kind of like, here's all this historical background. And then they never actually really said what it shows us. There would be kind of like a sentence wrap up that would be like those concluding sentences, like, and this shows whatever. And it like, goes back to the prompt. So one of the things that I'm going to do this year is really focus on that commentary. It also kind of depends on like how my students did and what info I get on the instructional report. But I feel like under pressure, maybe students were focusing more on their evidence and less on their commentary. I do think the prompt was challenging, but I also kind of want to talk to my students about like if you're going to write about these kind of really big topics like World War II and civil rights movement, like can we narrow it down a little bit more? Because that was something that would a lot of the essays were like really general. The vertical farms, and they spelt it wrong. I honestly, I don't even know that I had ever heard of a vertical farm. I don't know if that's bad until like that prompt. Um, I don't know. But then now people are posting on the Facebook page like pictures of like vertical farm, like anything that says vertical farms. Let's see. So on the right side, the author, verbs of choice. Okay. And there's jazz hands. This is awesome. Okay. So, and there's a punch to the left. Okay. Honestly though, like if there's a dance to it, I think that students will remember it. And I say that because the other day some friends and I were talking about, how in high school teachers have like different like songs that like for us we did, well now that I'm saying this I can't remember, it was the quadratic formula I think to Pop Goes the Weasel. Like I don't remember what we used the quadratic formula for, but I do remember that song. So I bet your students are going to remember this thesis dance. Let's see. Post it in the Facebook group to cheer everybody up. That would be awesome. But yeah, I think the biggest thing overall is like for argument was the commentary. For people who had the other essays like rhetorical analysis and synthesis, like it seems like, well, maybe the scores are kind of similar, but did you notice anything about the commentary? Like, was it lacking in a lot of cases? I don't know. I feel like for Q3, it was harder. But my roommate who had the other Q3 prompt that was about community voices, she said that students really seemed to connect with that one. And some students were giving really good like personal experience and like really tying it back to the quote. So I don't think it's like a universal thing. I'm wondering if it's just like the prompt itself that was hard. I don't know. We have to use the previous year so that like next year for like this upcoming school year, I'll use the 2023 exam as our mock exam. But now that we have two versions of the test, I don't know which one we'll choose. Commentary is the key to the lower and higher scores. I agree. I feel like I don't want to say it's not hard to get a 3 out of 4. I do think though that if students are able to really think about like earning those points and kind of budgeting their time and playing to their strengths, I think it really helps them on test day. And of course, if they have like a strong background in commentary and like understanding of it, it can help. The RA commentary was better than you were expecting, but there were many who were only summarizing. That's good because I feel like that's one of the things that I think like I don't know, like as an AP Lang community, I feel like we've been really focusing on the RA commentary and like in a sense. So I mean, obviously like we can't fix everything, but I think kind of looking at it, I think rhetorical analysis is the hardest for students. And so it's good to see that they're getting the commentary. Well, okay, I shouldn't say it's the hardest. It's like the one, at least for my students, it's the one that they have the least experience with, which makes it the hardest initially. I was gonna say, I wonder if Chris can make a video of this dance, we can show it next month. Yeah, students sometimes think that paraphrasing is their commentary. So they have to kind of unlearn that. I agree with that. Too much what and not enough how and why. Yes, I say that to my students all the time. Because I honestly don't think it's super hard for most students to figure out the what, but it's the getting to the how and the why that's difficult. Not a video person. Hey, I wasn't either 4 or 5 years ago. I'm still not. And yet I still show up on YouTube. You could, I was gonna say you could get your students to do the dance, but you probably can't. Well, thank you. Yeah, I posted some videos recently. I try not to like spam Facebook and social media too much with the videos. If you are on my email list, I tried to send out a video today with like, or a video, an email today with the video links because I try to like send it in like as few emails as possible or as few posts as possible. But I've been doing videos about rhetorical analysis. So I have one about some teacher tips, some activities, and then the multiple choice video where it's like a round table discussion. Actually, we look like the Brady Bunch because it's a Zoom call, talking about different techniques. So if you are looking for ideas for multiple choice, that video is really cool. There's like we started by talking about how to divide students into groups. Then we started talking about like different multiple choice techniques. So yeah, and I hope to do more of those videos too. And synthesis, many scores 2 and 3 came down to the source driven versus speaker driven. See, that's really interesting. I feel like I wish we had like good maybe we do, maybe the sample sets are good for it this year. I wish we had a sample set that really showed us like source driven versus speaker driven, so that kids could see it. How were your what do they call them, benchmarks? Like did they show that in the benchmarks, or was that just like a trend you saw over time? Because I don't know when they're going to release the benchmarks. Usually it takes a little bit. The benchmarks, by the way, are the well, it's like the essays that you get that like kind of show you the scores. Like this is what a 141 looks like. Okay, that's good that the benchmarks were super helpful. There's been a lot of talk about asking for a rangefinder and like more info, because for those that are readers, we get there's like the benchmarks, so there's like it's like this is an example of a three. But then there's like we had calibration sets, we had training sets, there are the validity checks. So there's a lot of other essays that they could use. I would love to see, I don't know if they would ever do this, but I would love to see multiple like essays within each score. So like a six, since there's different ways to earn the sophistication point, like I want samples of each method. I want to see a 140, a 131, a 130, and I want to see multiple of the 120s because y'all, there are so many ways to earn a 120. Like there's like the I barely made it, and then there's like the I'm almost a 130. There's a range, and that's what my students find hard to understand when I give them the College Board benchmarks. Is they're like, well, I got the same score as this, but my essay is better. And it's like, it might be, but it's not up to the next score yet. So I wish they had I wish they gave us more because they have them. Yes, there's a million different ways to give someone a 2 in row B. That's like, I think that's what's so hard as a teacher and sometimes even as a reader is it's like, okay, well, you didn't do it this way, but you still didn't do it enough to earn this point or vice versa. Adding a sentence or paragraph that starts with source A says is more on the 2 level. Yes, absolutely. Because it's really just kind of summarizing. I hate it when students call it source A. Or like, oh, okay, I shouldn't say that. I don't mind it if it's in the parenthetical citation. I hate it when it says like according to source A. Like I don't make very many rules in my classroom about like, oh, you can't write it this way. But I'm like, look, I'm gonna tell y'all how I want to see it, and I do not want to see according to source A. What's the other one? There's one for rhetorical analysis. Well, they're not allowed to tell me that the speaker uses diction. I actually have students who will like so I think it's my first year teaching AP Lang. They were like, well, what can we say then? And I said, you have to put an adjective in front of it. And they're like, okay, fine, good diction. I was like, y'all, that's not what I mean. So then they would like, when they left my class and were seniors, then they would come back and sneak in my room and write good diction on the board. And then after some of them graduated, they would come back to visit and they would sneak in my room and write good diction on the board. Or they had siblings in the class and they would like tell their siblings to write it. Last school year was the first year that nobody wrote good diction on the board. It's just kind of sad. But yeah, they're not allowed to tell me that the writer uses diction. Oh, yeah, and the syntax one gets me. I don't know if it's just me, but I don't think I could write a very meaningful paragraph about syntax. Like, not like a whole paragraph. Mm. Same for logos, ethos, pathos. Yeah, I don't it's weird because like, it's like I want them to know what they are, but like I give them like sentence frames or like alternatives. It's like I don't want you to tell me uses logos. Um, I will accept like logically asserts or logically claims or something, but I really want them to tell me like what they did that was logical. So like, did they use a fact? Is that why it was logical? Talk about the fact and then tell me it was logical. Don't say uses logos. I have found that the more I curb that in 10th grade, because I teach 10th, 11th, and 12th, and I know not everybody has that same alignment. But the more I curb that in like 10th grade, the easier it is for AP Lang. So if any of you are on like an only 11th grade teacher, but you know that they're learning logos, ethos, pathos, or diction or whatever in like 9th and 10th, it might be worth that conversation with those teachers. I don't know. It kind of depends on what your relationship is with them about like, it's not that we don't want them to know what it is, but we want to like get out of the habit of saying like uses whatever. Maybe 9th grade's a little too young though. But at least in 10th grade, most of my students, especially if they were given alternatives, they were able to use those alternatives. Yes, it's like they're saying the writer uses words. When I told them a couple years ago was like, literally every writer has used diction. I was like, my son who like is a toddler or was a toddler at the time, who could barely talk, he uses diction. So it's like you're not really telling me anything profound. I also tell them that like as far as like the good diction thing, like your job is not really to praise the writer. I think sometimes students like they like to tell us like how like wonderful the speech is. And I just kind of got in the habit of telling my students like, look, the College Board is going to choose something that you could just assume it's good. Like you don't need to like talk about how like what was the word kids were using a couple years ago, like Oh, there was something they were like they were trying to praise the speech, and it was like, yeah, it's not really what you're supposed to be doing. They're talking about oh, they are thinking skills, not writing words. Yes. So anyway, I think like trying to get students away from that early on can really help. But like the other thing though, and I say that, but the flip side is you have to meet students where they are. And so like it's okay on the exam for them to talk about logos, ethos, pathos. It might not score as well, but for some students, that's the win. I tell them to reason, not rate. Okay, I like that too. Yeah, because they're not really like supposed to tell us like how good it is. Oh, Tyler, I'm sorry, I didn't like mean to skip over your question. Um, how important? Okay, so at the end of the day, looking at your AP Lang class, how important is the test? I find myself wondering if I'm spending too much time on the test and burning them out. Okay, so here's the thing, and this is going to kind of depend on what your students' goals are. I teach in a rural district, and at least 50% of my students are on free and reduced lunch. Um, for my students, the test means that they get college if they get a qualifying score, they get college credit. And for a lot of my students, they go to a local community college because it offers really cheap rates. And so because of that, no matter how bright they are, a lot of them go to these less expensive colleges because they can't afford much better. So because of that, I focus very heavily on the test because that's my students' goal. If I taught in a different circumstance, I might focus less on the test. But for my students, they are. Oh, also, I should mention that in the state of Arkansas, they pay for students to take the test, so it's free for my students, which is a very nice thing for them. But like at my school, the kids take it because they want that credit. So like we have a very honest conversation at the beginning of the year just to kind of make sure that that is in fact what they want, but they want the focus on the test. Now, if your students are, I assume a lot of students want, obviously like good test scores, but like, for instance, like my friend who teaches the dual enrollment class, a lot of her students could care less about the exam because it's dual enrollment. Like they're getting the college credit anyway. And so she focuses more on skills. And honestly, a lot of what we do is very, very similar because I believe that the skills that are on the exam are worth it. So I come at it from a lens of the test and like, hey, these are skills you're going to need in college and for the exam. Whereas she's kind of like she comes at it from a different perspective. But at the end of the day, we're focusing on the same skills. So I think that might be something to think about. I can see that other people have responded. I think they've got some really good answers as well. Um, yeah, Sarah said teaching the skills so they don't get bored. I think part of it too is like I always try to come up with something that's like a little different or a little hands-on. And regardless of the test, I try to change a couple texts each year, like a speech or two or something, just to kind of make it more current. And like make it like tailored to the students. So like a couple years ago, I had like a bunch of athletes, like my whole class was athletes. One of them, like super proud of her, it basically is on track to be an Olympian for Team USA softball for the upcoming Olympics. So if you see on my page, I'm posting about an Arkansas softball player, it's because she's one of my former students. So anyway, her group, like I tried to tailor stuff to sports. Um, the next year's class did not like sports. So I had to choose something different. This upcoming year, I've got probably the most polarized class I will have ever had is this upcoming year. So I'm going to be incorporating a lot of student choice. So that way I can get more voices represented and kind of appeal to the different interests and needs of my students. So as far as like not wanting them to be bored with the test, I think a lot can be said for like how we present the material and like what we're presenting for our students too. Um, which is I'm sure you probably already knew that, but that was just something I was thinking about recently is like how I kind of tweak things for the students so that way even though we're focusing on like the skills, it's a little bit more interesting for them. Laura says, I struggle with this too. The test is the most important thing to my students and my admin. That's the other thing. I forgot to mention admin. Our admin, hmm, they don't really care about AP scores. They care about the ACT scores. And I think it has to do with state funding, but I don't know. They like our scores. Um, we get like a good job email sometimes. um, let's see. I want to see I want them to see the class about being about skills that they can apply in college and life. Yeah, I think the life application is important too because a lot of times students are like, "Oh, how are we going to use this?" I've had students tell me in the past like I can't watch movies or commercials or anything in the same way because I'm analyzing them. Um, and then, like, when it was, like, political debate time, because our history teachers have the kids watch some of the political debates for, like, extra credit, students were like, "I was analyzing their rhetoric, and I couldn't stop." And I'm like, "Well, that could be a good thing." So that I think is important too, is those, like, life applications. Okay, so Tyler, you're trying to build your program. Um, oh, do you have is it are you in a small school? Because I'm running into a situation where, like, sometimes the AP classes are offered at the same time, so kids have to choose. So, when you say that you're competing with other departments, is it because it's a small school and, like, there's only certain options they could take? Oh, okay, so, like, maybe bigger school, but, like, not too many AP options. Yeah, that kinda happened with us. Um, it actually happened this past year. My top 2 AP Lang students, um, wanted to take some math class, and it was never offered during the same time as my AP Lang class, ever, and then suddenly it was. Thankfully, our school let them do an independent study where, like, they sat in on one of my other classes. It was kinda weird. So I had, like, 2 classes going on at the same time because I really wanted these kids to take the test. But yeah, I know what you mean about, like, you're having to compete with the other classes, or sometimes we have to compete with electives too. Sometimes it's not even just the AP classes because at our school, sometimes the electives are only offered 1 period a day, so we have to really try to spread that out. I think the best thing you can do, it sounds like it's probably what you're already doing, is just, stay true to, like, who you are as a teacher and keeping the class, like, useful and informative and fun, and, I think we can always, hope that, like, kids are, like, telling each other, like, "Oh, I'll take this class next year." Bye, Sheena, thank you for popping in, and next year, if we're both in Tampa, we have to get a picture together. Really struggle with US history. Many don't want both. See, that's interesting because I wish more of my students that took AP Lang would take APUSH. They a lot of them next year will, but this past year didn't want to because our APUSH teacher makes them do a lot of notes. But I have found that my students who also take a higher level history class have better Q3 evidence. Um, and like they whenever we do certain speeches that are kind of tied to history, like I don't have to do as much about the context because I'll kind of be like, so what do we know about this? And then they'll have already been told it from her. Gotta add some dance moves. Absolutely. Okay, well, y'all, this has been fun. Hopefully, we got to like clarify like what info we get for our instructional reports, what went well on the exam. Thank you to those who were fellow readers who were commenting as well. I'm optimistic for all of us to get our reports soon. Oh, y'all offer IB, so the AP suffers from that. That's interesting to me that they're offered in the same school. I know some schools do that, but we don't really have IB around us. At least not that I know of. I don't know of any schools around in my area that do IB. Yes, please do check out the other videos from today and this past week. I've been trying to post more. Um, and also I have if y'all have suggestions, I know I asked last time and I got some good ideas. I'm trying to come up with like some back to school stuff as well. Yes, I appreciate you coming. Thank you, to reflect and all that. Wait, someone said, "Were those from last summer?" The ones that I did, in the email today should have been from this summer. They should have been, the most recent ones on my channel. unless I like terribly linked something completely wrong. They should have been from like this past week, the first couple. Yes. If it has like a white thumbnail, those are new. I can kind of tell because every like I don't do it on purpose, but usually it takes about a year and then I change my thumbnail style. So on anything with like a white background is probably pretty new. Um, but also on YouTube, it should tell you the date. So it should tell you like published like 2 days ago or a week ago or whatever. So if I did it right, the ones I linked should have been pretty current. You're so welcome. All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope to see you next month. Tim couldn't be here tonight because he is traveling for an APSI, but he did commit to doing this again next school year. So if you're kind of like, where's Tim? Like he's coming back, I promise. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.